What's up, QAA listeners?
The fun and games have begun.
I found a way to connect to the internet. I'm sorry, boy. Welcome, listener, to Premium Chapter 214 of the QAnon Anonymous podcast, the Judge Dredd Justice Warrior episode. As always, we are your hosts, Jake Rockatansky
and Julian Field. And this week, we've got some very special guests, Matt Bors and Ben Clarkson. They recently released a collected edition of their comic book series, Justice Warriors, which is pretty hard to describe. I recently consumed it, and I found it to be amazing. Really, vicious and very dark humor, absolutely unhinged in the greatest way. It's a dystopian tale set in kind of a cyberpunk future. There's mutants, including a sentient piece of shit. There's astrology, a lot of astrology, which is cool. Ultra-violent police force, and super cool social media platforms that everyone enjoys using. And I recommend people pick up a copy because it is a piece of art and it is brilliantly demented. So I'll include a link in the episode description. Matt, Ben, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having us on. This is great.
It's a pleasure to be here. Actually, I do have to say this podcast was hugely influential in my part of the writing of the series. So it's hugely pleasurable to be here.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me. That's like a huge honor. Thank you.
Well, as you can see in the the story of Justice Warriors, conspiracy and online hysteria really kind of drives a lot of the social movement and the plot.
Yeah, it's kind of unexpected. I mean, when people recommend me comic book that's kind of a comedy, I'm always a little bit dubious. I'm always like, oh, is this gonna be funny, But it is funny, obviously. There's moments of fun and laughter, but it always feels bad in an incredible way.
Good.
It is perfect. It's it carries the poison of our era deep into the future. And yeah, so we're going to be talking about, as well, 1995 Sylvester Stallone vehicle Judge Dredd, which was the original movie adaptation of Judge Dredd. And so it's a bit of a movie night, I guess. And that comic book series ranges back to the 70s. So it's really, it's been going for a long time. And I wanted to ask, before we kind of get into Justice Warriors, could you kind of explain why you have every single Dredd comic behind you on the wall? And then also, would you say it was a source of inspiration for Justice Warriors?
So, yeah, I'm a Judge Dredd freak. I don't even have all the volumes because there's so many, but I'll probably read them all eventually. So for people who can't see behind me, I mean, I got my bookshelf and the entire top 2 rows are just Judge Dredd case files and related stuff.
Just tomes and tomes of Dredd.
Yeah, I haven't actually been into the comic book since I was a kid, but I did watch Judge Dredd as a kid, and that was influential on me along with a ton of other futuristic dystopia, cyberpunk type things. I've always loved that stuff. And I don't know when it was, but definitely a couple years ago, I just started getting into Dredd and reading it a ton. And it is influential on Justice Warriors. It's the thing that it gets compared to a lot. But I wouldn't say that it was foundational to it because Ben really developed this world independently and then came to me. So all the main characters in the conceit of Bubble City and the surrounding uninhabited zone slum where all the mutants live is Ben. And Ben is less. I don't think Ben read any Dredd comics before we got together.
I had never read Dredd, but I had seen the movie in 1995. And I remember thinking as an adult, wouldn't it be great if that movie was a satire?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it is. I mean, we'll get into it, but it is as if Verhoeven didn't understand, didn't want to make satire or something. The movie, at least.
Yeah.
Matt, do you think that in the comic, they were aware, at any point in the run, or maybe the whole run, that it was a deeper satire, so they weren't just casting Dredd as a superhero or hero?
No, 100%. The comic is intended as a satire. It starts out as kind of based on, it's the late 70s, and it's based on the lawman of the future concept. Basically, it's what if Dirty Harry was a super cop in the future? The first few episodes, or whatever you want to call them, issues, are kind of off from what it becomes, and then it quickly becomes the Judge Dredd and John Wagner was the co-creator. He's the head writer on it, him and Alan Grant. And they wrote I don't know, a decade or two of Dredd just by themselves
Yeah.
every week. And, you know, it's just funny stuff about what if a cop was so devoted to the concept of the law that it led to like all this sort of wacky stuff. It's not just like executing criminals all the time, like kind of in the movie. It's a lot more funny and self-aware. It does get serious at times, and they deal like more explicitly with fascism as time goes on. Like Wagner does a couple more serious arcs. The most famous one is America, and that's where like Dredd is explicitly portrayed as a fascist. But then he also saves the city from destruction, you know, number of times. And it's a genre comic, right? There's like adventure stories, there's procedurals, there's serial killers, there's cataclysmic events that threaten to destroy the city and all that.
There's a recurring dinosaur character.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Really? What kind of dinosaur? What kind of dinosaur?
Like a T-Rex.
Oh, God.
What's the T-Rex name?
There we go.
What's his name again?
Yeah. I should
Just grab a random book, flip to a page, Matt, and tell us what you see. This will work.
Okay, we got Dredd is on I just opened to a random page in Case Files 4. Dredd is on a spaceship, and he's searching for Judge Child, of course. And he's looks like he's en route for Xanadu, and they're interrupted by a sinister intergalactic salesman. So it's like, I mean...
Yeah.
That's why I love Dredd and have all the books on my shelf, because it rules.
Is this intergalactic salesman trying to pitch him Audacity?
The podcast recording equipment of choice here.
Very easy to download, very easy to record.
Yeah. But that makes sense, you know, that over like a couple of decades, you'd have obviously all the kind of comic book stuff where they're resetting or they're doing, you know, like expanding the world. But at its core, I mean, there's an element of Starship Troopers where you can still support the main cast. Like you can still like want them to win against the bugs and understand that what you're watching is like a demented parody of fascism, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it.
That is interesting because, you know, I think that is something that carries over into Justice Warriors, is that feeling of like, you're kind of, I mean, actually this strains that, right? I think you guys are more willing to make your main characters absolute degenerates in a way where it's not possible to think of them as heroes, but it also still somehow works where you do kind of, you understand like what they're going through because they're obviously like pawns in this much larger, insane and terrible system, but they truly are disgusting and are committing like hyper-violence all the time. And I mean, there was this line like very early on where the rookie sentient shit cop, called Officer Shit, but spelled with, you know, a bit more German, where he goes, I like that and I would do that again, like after killing someone. He ventilates someone and just looks and goes, I am willing to do that again.
Yeah, the vibes that I got when I was reading through the first issue is that same like coziness that I had playing like a LucasArts like demented point and click like Sam and Max or like something like that, like from like the early 90s. Like it has that really kind of like irreverent sort of tone, which is also, you know, I think supposed to be what Dredd was going for. And once we get into the movie, like we'll see that there is a major conflict, and you can kind of tell in the movie between what the director Danny Cannon wanted to portray as a huge fan of the original Dredd comic series, and what Sylvester Stallone thought it was about, having never read the comics.
He's awesome. That is so awesome that they're like, please, Sylvester, can you just crack it open? It's a comic book. It's got lots of drawings. And he's like, no, I am the movie.
He was so perfect for the part too.
Oh, he's so good. He's so good at it.
He has the presence for
Yes.
that part, you know, just to, because Dredd is a character who sort of belts these one-liners out, and you know, like, I am the law, of course, but you know, like there'll be some absurd thing in the comic, and especially in like the 70s and 80s, and like the kicker is always like the last panel, and he's hauling him off to jail, and he'll make some kind of you know, court's adjourned, punk, or whatever.
Yes.
And it'll be like a destitute family or whatever who who jaywalked, and he's like, that's 20 years, and you know, like here, do the long walk to prison. It's stuff like that. And then you're like, okay, Stallone can deliver.
Well, and they actually, funny enough, they capture that better, I think, in the reboot, the 2012.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, Carl Urban does a great job.
That's why we decided to only cover the bad one.
Oh, of course. Yeah, we don't want to give you anything good.
No, we don't like to have fun.
First, you don't deserve deserve it. Second of all, it's not as funny, but there's that great scene where they're walking into the apartment complex and he sees a homeless guy sitting and he's like, yeah, it's 5 years. He's like, it's 5 years. You better be gone when I get back. And like, he comes back out and the homeless guy's still there and he's like, I told you, man. All right, that's 5 years right there. Like, you get a little bit more of that than I think you do in the Stallone version. There's not a ton of satire in it, except
we're not jumping into the movie yet, my brother. I don't know why you're trending that way very quickly. I must punish you immediately.
It's all I know.
Listen, Jake, I am the podcast.
I am the podcast.
You have been listening to a sample of a premium episode of QAnon Anonymous.
We don't run any advertising on the show, and we'd like to keep it that way.
For $5 a month, you'll get access to this episode, a new one each week, and our entire library of premium episodes.
So head on over to patreon.com/QAnon Anonymous and subscribe.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I love you.
Jake loves you.